My husband and I bought a house town back in September of 17, and we've had some super weird things happen since. Most of these experiences has happened on our second story. For background, where the stairs come up my office is immediately to the left, then there is a long hall to the right with the hallway bathroom. The laundry room is just past that, my son's room on the other side, and the master bedroom at the very end of the hall. The access to the attic is in the master bedroom closet. As our family goes, it's me, my husband, my son, and our two large dogs. When we first moved in, our sons were only 2 to 3 years old and had just started making full sentences. He would be playing all day without any issues, but whenever it started to get dark outside, he started getting nervous and wouldn't want to go in his room. He had come downstairs at one point saying, "Mummy, do you hear it?" "Hear what, kiddo?" "The baby's crying, Mummy." My son is the only child, so you can imagine my confusion at this. I came upstairs with him and I asked him where he was hearing it from, thinking he may have been hearing the neighbours through the walls. He took my hand and pulled me towards the master bedroom, stopping just short of the threshold. He pointed into the darkest corner of the room and said, "Over there, the baby's crying over there." My body went numb. At this point, I tried to push it off, but I told him there is no baby, and he was just imagining it. This persisted for about a month before he finally stopped talking about the crying baby. During this time, I had been doing some research on our house, and there had been no deaths in the house that I could find, let alone any kids that lived in the house before us. A few weeks after my son stopped mentioning about the baby, I started hearing scratching noises right above my bed in the attic. I told my husband, and he thought we had a raccoon or something living in the attic. He went up a few days later, and there was nothing. I'm normally a heavy sleeper, but at least twice a week I would wake up to a faint scratching noise right above me. I did my best to ignore it and just to go back to sleep. This seemed to work, as we hadn't had an issue for a while up until recently. I have always felt somewhat uneasy on the second floor, but I had attributed it to my past paranormal experiences growing up, and being a little paranoid now and thinking my senses were on point. A few months ago, my husband and I were talking about how our son has this weird affinity about that crying baby. When he was younger, and I had mentioned that one day, while I was taking a nap, I woke up suddenly to being sideways on the bed with one leg hanging off towards the closet, almost like I had been dragged towards it. However, I don't remember being pulled at all. That I do flop around a lot in my sleep, and I sort of just brushed it off. After I told my husband about this, he frowned a little bit and said he had a weird experience too recently. Apparently he woke up one morning around 2 to 3 a.m. and saw a figure standing by his side of the bed. He said it was all black and he couldn't really make out a face or any distinct features. He went to kick the figure thinking someone may have broken into the house, and his foot went right through the figure. This freaked him out, but he's a firm believer that you don't acknowledge paranormal things. They can't do anything, so of course he rolls over and tries to go back to sleep, and doesn't think to mention it to me until I told him about my experience. The whole time we have been here, the dogs will randomly get spooked or will stare at something that you don't see. Every once in a while, our wolf hybrid, who is typically scared of his own shadow, will get upset and his hair will stand on end, and he will emit a low but vicious growl. Our other dog is a black lab mix, but is getting old, 10 years old now, and doesn't really do much other than sleep on her bed and try to get all the pets and treats from us. This brings us to the present. Yesterday there was a decent storm that came through our area. It was semi-dark out and thunder every once in a while. I'm working from home during the virus pandemic, and my mum had to pick up my son around 11:30, so I can work in peace without my son constantly bothering me. A few hours later, I'm listening to a podcast while working and I hear a faint mumble that almost sounded like Mummy. The chirring thing that it sounded exactly like my son. I turned around to tell him that he needed to go back to his room and not to bother me while I'm working. But I was turning around, I remembered that he wasn't even home. I was here by myself with the dogs. There was no one behind me and no one in the hall. At this point, I tried to brush it off, thinking my mind is playing tricks on me, when my wolf hybrid starts losing it. All his hair sticks up. He gets between me and the door and starts doing his rogue growl. This freaked me out a little bit, but I told him to stop while he listened and laid back down, but without taking his eyes off the hallway. About an hour later, I was in a zone with work and I was talking with a co-worker on our team chat. They sent me something funny enough to make me audible laugh. That I then heard a tiny giggle that sounded exactly like my son, coming from his room down the hall, who still isn't home at this point. I nearly fell out of my chair at this point with how scared I actually was. I got up and checked the rooms down upstairs, but I was home alone, like I thought. I had to get back to work as we were starting to get busy, but I was on edge and straining to hear if anything was going to happen, or if anything was even there. About 10 minutes later, I heard a crash from something relatively small, but still loud, coming from downstairs. My dogs run down the steps, while I followed them. My PlayStation 4 controller, which was originally on the charging stand behind the TV, was in the middle of the living room floor. This made my blood run cold as I had not even picked anything up physically or even moved it, and I had a brown panic attack. I called my husband, who was already on his way home, and he said he would be there soon. When he got home, everything seemed to be just normal, like everything just stopped. This all happened from about 2 to 4 p.m. In the middle of the little thunderstorm, I had looked into it, and from what I can gather, something very evil, demonic, is living in our house. Should I be worried? What can I even do in this situation? I don't want to scare my son, but what can I do? I lived in Eston, Kentucky my whole life. I grew up way back in the horror, the last house on the road deep in the woods. I lived with my grandparents the majority of my childhood, and if I wasn't there, I was next door at my mum's house. Those woods had always given me a creepy feeling. I had felt stuff watch me. I have felt things touch me, and I've seen stuff that I can't explain. I'll tell a few happenings that have happened to me and my family. When I lived with my grandparents, I would sleep with my mum, and my dad slept in the other room, because they both snored very loud and would keep each other up. My grandma's bed was right beside the window facing the woods. My side of the bed was right next to the window, and in the summer she would keep the blind open and would open the screen on the window and would turn the fan on high. Kentucky summers are extremely hot, and I remember many nights laying there and not being able to close my eyes because I would feel something watching me from the woods. I would lie there and just stare into the darkness, hoping that I wouldn't see whatever it was and that it would just go away. I would just lie there for hours and hours. My whole family would see little small figures dart around the house, across the hall from the bedroom to bedroom. My mum had witnessed a lot in this house. One morning my grandma had taken my mum to work. She would go in around 6:30. She had never got a driving license, so my dad always had to take her and from work. My mum was getting ready for work and that morning and thought my dad had come back home on town. She said that was quick, and he didn't reply. She said she heard him rustling around the cabinet like he does every morning, working on making coffee. She said she even heard him spit in his spit bottle. My dad had chewed tobacco for a long time. She heard something that she can't explain. And then she heard a cabinet being opened, and then went into the living room, and no one was home. She left for work as soon as possible. Living in a double wide we had beside my grandma, I would sleep with my mum most of the time. The heat never cooled down very well. The other side of the trailer, for some reason, and in the winter it would get really cold. Her bed was facing the master closet and master bathroom, and my side of the bed faced the master bathroom. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, but I would see a woman sitting in the bathroom floor in the fetal position. She would be crying, and then she would look up at me every now and again. I would tell my mum about it, but she just looks at me and tells me to go back to bed. The nights I would sleep in my bedroom, I would see what looked like little trolls in my closet scampering around. I would shut the closet door, but by the morning it would be ajar. The property's woods and land had something on it, whenever it was to be an Indian burial ground or whatever. But being up there after dark now, as an adult, I still feel like stuff's watching me. Some stories from my grandma had told me during the 50s. My dad is super religious, the type that if he's telling a story and he messes up one fact, he will soon correct it and say, "Lord, forgive me." So I know for a fact that these are God's honest truth. My dad grew up in one-room house here in the country, not too far from where I grew up. Him and his brother and my uncle were around 15 or 16 and were sitting on the back porch of their house just talking and laughing, probably drinking coffee. He swears on his life that up in the sky, maybe 500 feet, a 3-panelled door appears, not in cloud form, but an actual door. He said that the door was white and he had a small red lantern at the bottom of the door. He said that they watched it for hours. It just sat there. It could just see the flame flickering in the lantern. He said a few hours it just completely disappears. Another one he told me it was about my dad. My great-grandpa and his dad, my great-great-grandpa, fishing with another father and son one night on the North Fork of Kentucky's river. They did this for about a week, around midnight. Not sure why midnight, maybe better fishing. Anyway, they were heading back to town upriver, and they started hearing a funeral hymn getting closer and closer. They stopped the boat on the river bank and said that their boat was floating towards them with nothing but an old hickory casket in it. Sat there in amazement and scared to death. He said that he could have reached out and touched the casket, that how close it is. The other father and son said, "Well, I think that's a sign for us to go home." I don't think they ever went fishing that night again. But to this day, I don't know what was in that casket. He's never told me this, and I don't think I want to know. 15 years ago, my family and I were living in Madagascar, where people were pretty superstitious and always have lots of great ghost stories. We lived in one huge old house on the side of where my parents worked, the kind with really thick walls and long corridors. We learned rather quickly that this used to be the director's house from long ago, where his wife had died from the plague or something like that. The story always varied a little depending on who was telling it, but everyone was positive the house was haunted. Generally speaking, the house was indeed scary. The basement was really dark and low, and there was a room within the basement that was even darker, and that had a white stain just above the doorway, shaped like a skull. The attic was kind of fun and kind of scary, very goosebumps looking, dusty and huge as it would covered all the sides of the house, but there was a little dark room in there with no windows, and would just feel that I should not go in. It was deep, and it just gives me an uneasy feeling in my stomach, and I didn't want to go in there, even though it was almost drawing me in, like something terrible but fascinating. The corridors were really long, so the walks at night to go to the bathroom were always terrifying. The bathrooms were just in front of the house. That climbed up to the attic, and I was always almost paralysed with fear when passing it. And we experienced a few weird things like this. Several times my mum was home alone and saw movement behind her. Some of the windows were probably as old as the house itself, so the glass was uneven and would never give a clear reflection. It was probably nothing, but it was still very unsettling. My brother was 9 and woke up one night and felt that he heard someone crying over him. He felt like he could just feel the tears, but he wasn't scared, because he knew that the person was nice. He was just sad. I was maybe 12, and I felt more than once like someone was sitting on my bed, at the end of the bed. I would just be paralysed in fear, so I never dared to look up, or even move for that matter. I could also hear footsteps from above my room from the attic. My parents, hardcore scientists, said it was probably rats or an owl, but I was never convinced. It sounded so clearly like footsteps, like ones you would hear from humans. We stayed in the house for 5 years, and this weird little stuff never stopped. Nothing batshit crazy or horrifying, just a feeling that there was someone unthreatening here. But to this day, I still don't know if what I was seeing was paranormal. I never believed in the paranormal, but after the experiences my mum, my brother, and me had gone through, but I'm not so sure now. I will never be sure again. When I was about 2 to 5 months old, my family lived in a trailer on a piece of property with an old, large white house on it, probably built in the late 1800s. My father was born in 1917 in a small community, rural Rosthenia, that went bust during the Great Depression, but at one point it had a general store, train station, post office, etc. Now it's just a block, gold dust loop, amid a bunch of fields in a central Rosthenia. Anyway, the large white house was a doctor's house. I was born in 1983. My dad was 66 when I was born. I'll make it clear, he didn't believe in anything supernatural, ghosts, aliens, that kind of stuff. If he had never seen it, it didn't exist, period. He told stories about the town he used to live in when he was younger, and one of the stories was that the doctor's wife took her kid and left him. She and the kid disappeared, so the story where she ran off, sometimes in the late 30s or so. The doctor committed suicide afterwards, and the large white house went occupied and boarded up. As I said, when I was born, we lived in a trailer on the property. My dad bought another trailer and had been a carpenter back in the day, so he built like large homes, a couple lots over using the 2 trailers. Now when I started walking, I started telling all these stories about an old man that I had all kinds of adventures with, and called him my grandpa. I had no grandpa alive at the time. Parents brushed it away as an overactive imagination, and in time I'll forget all about it. Years later, I'm talking to my dad after a news story about an earthquake that he mentions feeling tremors when I was younger in the house at night, to which I replied that was impossible since Rostania didn't even have earthquakes. But in typical old man fashion, he became agitated and swore that occasionally his bed would shake at night. Weird. That's what I thought to myself at the time, but before my mother passed away, she told my sister not to live in the house with the daughters and to sell it instead of, because she thought something bad was there. When asked to elaborate, she said the whole time we lived there, she occasionally heard noises when no one was in the house, and footsteps. She was very sick and had moved out of the house after her and my father's separation, then passed away shortly after. I don't think my sister really paid much attention to what she said. She wound up moving into the house a few months later. A couple years later, I'm in Texas. My sister is now living in the house that we grew up in. She calls me freaked out, deaf out, and complains she heard an old man's voice and a woman's voice arguing and a child's voice. I roll my eyes and brush it off. Then my older brother goes over and leaves that night, claiming he had heard the same. So then, being the religious people they were, I'm an atheist by the way, and called a local pastor. After this goes on for about 2 weeks with increased intensity, they do a blessing of the house and they are finishing my sister's dogs going berserk outside for no apparent reason, that the 3 lawn chairs on the porch are thrown into the yard, with no one or nothing else on the porch. There were 4 witnesses to this, all claiming the same thing happened. I didn't witness this, but I would have certainly liked to have seen it myself. In this case, after thinking about it, and having reading a lot of supernatural experiences, I think it's just that. A supernatural experience. The doctor killed himself, the missing wife and kid, the old man imaginary friend, my dad's bed shaking, and the eventual ghostly noises and occurrence. It definitely creeps me out though. It doesn't creep me out more than I was when I was little, but it just leaves me curious to what was actually going on in that house while we were living there. But those questions will never be answered. I used to live in a 110-year-old Victorian house in San Jose with a few buddies of mine. We'd hear stories from contractors that were preparing the house for breeding terrors after an old lady had gone senile after being transferred to a nursing home. Things like footsteps upstairs when no one was home, and the electrician in the basement, hollow noises where noises shouldn't come from, that kind of thing. Well, about 3 months after we moved in, we would be startled by a pallet heavy footsteps coming from the wooden stairs from the street. Thinking it was one of our roommates coming home early, we would always open the door to greet him. There was never anyone there. I can't stress that fact enough. Yet the best would come around 1.5 years later. I was spiriting on in the front room with my friend, and a late one night, probably like 3:30 if I recall correctly, I woke to the right side of my futon, this depressing in upon itself, and the wooden part of the futon creaking very loudly as if some extreme weight had been set on it. This was compounded by the fact that my whole left side of the futon I had been sleeping on lifted in the air by about 6 inches. Yeah, it was dead quiet, and all the hairs on my body went up as the hair got noticeably colder. I was sleeping towards the wall, and for about 2 very long minutes I tried to get myself to face whatever it was that was causing my whole bed to rise up. Let me tell you this, to even get that thing to creak, would have to jump up and down on it with its significant weight. Just the way it was creaking sounded like 300 IBS were just being forced on one joint. Whatever, it was dissipating into thin air. My whole bed slowly went back down again. I woke up with a slowly deep depression on my right side of the futon, something that I also can't stress enough would take lots of weight to do so, as if it was very firm futon mattress. I ran out of the house when whatever it was put me down. I locked the door and had to sleep outside. I actually got to sleep very easily though I think the whole stress of the situation just put me to sleep. The next day, I just went in and just pretended nothing happened. Nobody questioned me on why I was sleeping outside or anything. But to this day, I still don't know what was under the bed. I don't know if there's anything paranormal or anything, but I so hope to God it was. I lived in a haunted house for over 2 decades, so there were several examples of things that happened over the years. The house was built in the early 1700s. It was a beautiful, rambling old house with a big garden, outbuildings, 5 bedrooms, a working fireplace. My parents and 3 siblings and I were overjoyed to be moving into a massive house. After living in a 2 cramped bedroom terrace with no garden, my parents had bought the house for incredibly low choice, even for the 90s. It was cheap. I do wonder now if it was something to do with the hauntings. Anyway, it wasn't long before we realised we weren't the only residents. A few days after we moved in, my mum and were downstairs in the hallway, which ran the length of the house, from the front door to the kitchen, past the wide old staircase. As she watched, she saw the shadow of a man who seemed to be dressed in Jake Bean clothing based on a silhouette walk along the hall, then just disappeared into the hall by the stairs, as if he had walked away or walked through the door that was not even there. But that was only the start. We quickly got used to seeing and hearing things that weren't there. We constantly see black shapes swiftly moving out of the corner of our eyes. Then we turned to look. There would be no one there. Right at night, everybody had gone to bed. We would often hear voices talking softly at the base of the stairs. It sounded like 3 or 4 men murmuring to themselves or to each other, like a group of people planning something. But if we went to the stairs to listen, the voices would just stopped, like they planned for it. Now bearing this in mind, this was a detached house with thick, solid walls and only a quiet old couple for neighbours. We called the voices the murmuring men, and grew quite fond of them. My brother liked to stay up late and play video games in his room between the hours of 2 to 4 AM. He would often see a woman standing in his bedroom. She was wearing an apron over a Victorian dress. She told us about it, and we all agreed that it was weird. Later, when we were having the house redecorated, we discovered old servant bells in his room. So perhaps she had been a servant and was checking if the young master wanted anything. As well as seeing and hearing things, there were other indications that we weren't alone. Things would go missing, little objects you swear you left on the side. We would look high and low for them, but no sign of them anywhere. Then later, that same object will return in some incredibly unlikely place, like on top of a wardrobe or something like that. We'd even joke about it, but the house had taken it up. And sometimes my mum would yell, "Come on, house, this isn't funny, give it back," which usually resulted in turning up a day later. But despite these ghostly beings going on, or paranormal stuff going on, if you will, it was a very cozy home. Everyone who visited noted how welcoming the house was. After my parents divorced, that changed. My mother continued to live in the house with us kids, and made some adjustments to it so she could put it on the market. Don't know if that alone shook the spirits up or whatever. It was because we were all sad and depressed following a divorce, and those emotions were feeding things. But the atmosphere in the house changed completely. It grew heavy, oppressive. You would feel like someone was watching you in the hallways. None of the kids would go upstairs at night by ourselves. We wait and go together. You did not just want to go in the hallway alone, or even go on the stairs. It's that feeling that you're just being watched so intensely. My sister had to go upstairs alone at one point, and she was walking back to the stairs. She heard booting footsteps walking behind her. She closed her eyes and ran back upstairs as fast as she could. One afternoon, I was in my room reading, and I suddenly heard a woman sobbing quite loudly. She sounded like her heart was broken. I thought it was my mum, or maybe my sister. I ran out onto the sea landing, calling Mum, Sis, what is it? There was no one there. The noise stopped. I ran downstairs and my mum and my sister were sitting chatting happily in the kitchen. They were fine. I hadn't heard a thing. 6 months later, my brother and sister heard the same woman crying, and my brother thought he'd seen what looked like a swish of a dark blue skirt on the landing, but he couldn't been sure. My mum came upstairs one night to her bedroom and found every item on our dressing table had been pushed into the floor, as if someone had swept it off. We'd all been downstairs and the window was shut. Finally, late one evening, my sister was doing the washing up in the kitchen. The sink was in front of a large sash window. The glass in the window is old, and I don't know if it's older than the house, but it's thick and very wavy and distorts the reflection in them. As she was washing up, she felt the presence of someone in the room with her, somebody taller than her, standing behind her. She thought she would have been one of her brothers and looked up to see a tall reflection in the window. She turned around to speak to them, but nobody was there. My mum called the local visitor, and he came round with a specialist colleague that blessed the house. They sprinkled holy water and said prayers that definitely seemed to help. The house felt lighter. We didn't hear or see anything else, but we didn't stay around to see if it actually did work. My mum sold the house at the same time, and I left home and moved into my own house. Somebody else lived there now, and I wonder if there's any other spirits in our house, or if the spirits had come out again to see their new neighbours. My family moved in a small house in northeast Ohio when I was about 5 years old. I had a bedroom on the first floor a few years later, and everything went fine. The entire upstairs attic was my parents' bedroom, since it was just one giant bedroom. When I was about 12, I switched rooms with them so I could have the big room. The attic always gave me a strange feeling, but nothing horribly off-putting. Something I would be sitting in my desk alone, and I would manage to swoop myself out with what I thought was just my wild imagination. I just never felt completely alone for some reason. A few months after staying in the attic, a young boy started to appear in my dreams, probably about 6 years old. He was almost in blue in colour, had short dark hair, and wore little shorts and a button-down shirt, almost like a 1960s type school uniform. He'd always had a neutral expression on his face. He never spoke to me in my dreams. He was just there. He would just occasionally point things or just stare at me. I never once felt like he was evil or sadistic. I thought he would just wanted to be seen by me. I would always wake up feeling my dreams that I was being watched by seeing him in my dreams. One night I had a dream that he was standing by my bed staring at me, and and when I woke up I felt like an overwhelming presence close to my bed. I felt sick, like somebody was horribly wrong. But I still didn't feel like the boy was evil, just sad and lonely maybe. Like maybe he was having nightmares and wanted to be by me. I started to recognise his presence whenever I would feel like I wasn't alone in the room. Fast forward to when I was about 16, I hadn't seen the boy in my dreams for quite some time, until my grandmother passed away. I fell asleep the night before I awake and saw the boy in my dreams. I was in a field and he was standing on top of the hill with his back turned to me. Keep this in mind, I've been dreaming about him for about 4 years and he had never spoken to me before. He turns around and looks at me and he says in a slow, soft voice, "You know, her feet are cold." Then I woke up. I felt strange because he literally has never spoken to me before. But then he randomly tells me that somebody's feet are cold. So when I went to my grandma's open casket that day, and my mum was starting to throw a fit because along with my grandma's favourite belongings that were placed in her body in the casket, there was a pair of her favourite slippers on top. My mum wanted the slippers put on my grandma's feet because her feet were always cold when she was alive. She wanted to make sure my grandma's feet would be warm in the afterlife. I had no idea that my mum even asked for the funeral home to put her slippers on. I realised that the boy who often visited me in my dreams was letting me know that my grandma's feet were cold. Although I still saw him in my dreams and felt his presence, he never spoke to me again after this. I always felt a special connection with him. I felt more connected and had eased when he appeared in my dreams or when I felt his presence. He was like a guardian of some sort. I grew to care about him. I don't live with my parents anymore, and ever since I moved out, he stopped appearing in my dreams. I miss him now every day, and then I'll just go into my old bedroom and sit on the floor so he can see me, so he knows that I'm okay, and I still think about him. This is a story from about the year I lived in a haunted dorm room. In 2015, I was a freshman in college. I lived with my best friend Emily from high school before leaving for college. We had done some research about rumours online at our dorm building was haunted, but we didn't take it seriously. We lived on the second floor, and our room was between the stairs and the laundry room. The first month was normal, when we were settled into our new routines, one day when we got home from class and walked into our room, everything was open. All the drawers of our desks, dressers, tall standing wardrobes, everything. My first thought was somebody broke into our room and robbed us, but then that didn't make sense because you could only access our room with 2 key cards. One was mine and one was Emily's. Nobody else will have that key card. I called Emily to see if she was in class, but she was in the bathroom down the hall. When she came back, I showed her the room, and it wasn't like when she had left. At the time, we both thought it was the other one playing a prank, but neither of us did it. Over the next few couple months, some more things started happening that proved to both of us that it wasn't the other one playing pranks. We often came home to everything being open, but that's not it. At night we were both in bed and we could hear our laundry baskets being dragged across the floor and everything falling out from our shelves. One time we were in our bed with the lights out. I sneezed and Chloe said, "Bless you." When I said thank you, thinking it was Emily, I looked across the room and realised she was asleep. I also heard "hello" whispered in my ear a few times. Another time at night, I was up late studying while Em was asleep. I felt like I was being watched all night, but just told myself I was tired and paranoid, but I couldn't shake off the feeling. Then out of nowhere, I felt a light shove down on my back. Obviously, this scared the shit out of me. So I got up and yelled at Emily, but when she saw she was still in bed. Once when Emily was in the dorm room by herself, she was on the phone with her dad talking about all the weird stuff that's going on. And of course, right in Q, all at once, every single drawer flew open. After about a month of us being terrified, we got up the courage to talk to our HD about everything. We started with something like, so we had a weird question about our room. When she stopped us, she said, "Let me guess, stuff is moving around and you don't know why." Excuse me, what? She said every year she gets reports of people that lived in that room with stories the same as ours. Has happened for years. And she told us it was the ghost of a girl named Sarah who was known to be mischievous and liked to mess around. To be 100% honest, this part of the story I'm not sure I'm actually by 100%, but it was made us feel better to tell ourselves it was just a random girl. Anyway, a couple of months things settled down and occurrences became less frequent. We eventually felt comfortable in our room and if something happened we would just tell ourselves it was Sarah messing around again and to brush it off. Even though we were scared at times, we both agreed that nothing will ever felt evil and sinister. It did indeed just seem like mischievous spirit was either way. We never taunted it or tried to talk to it. I live in Wisconsin. For the most part, it's amazing. The gorgeous year round, and I've always felt safe here. But one of my friends begged to differ. For privacy reasons, I call him Ryan. Ryan's been my best friend for 7 years now. We met during 7th grade, and when the most popular game, Five Nights at Freddy's, came out, we started talking about it, and now for 7 years, we're still great friends. He recently told me a story that happened a few years ago. He didn't talk to me about it and waited so long because the nightmares he had. So Ryan was home alone and at this house with his family friend, I'll call him Finn. Finn and Ryan were playing video games on the PS3 in his mum's room. It was roughly about 9:30 PM. It was pitch black outside. Ryan and his family are lock freaks. They keep everything locked, and by everything I mean everything. All the doors that could read outside, the windows, even on the second story. They even had screwdriver holders for their rooms to lock it. While Finn and Ryan were playing Little Big Planet in his mum's room, Finn stopped playing. Ryan looked at Finn, confused. He asked Finn what was wrong. What happened? The usual when something like this would happen. What Finn told Ryan haunted him forever. Finn told Ryan that as he went to pick up his glass of water from the table next to his mum's bed, he saw someone or something. All Finn could say is he saw a black figure step out of Ryan's mum's closet and float away. Both Ryan and Finn picked up spare bats. They have in each room and checked everywhere. This is where their fight or flight response kicked in, and they chose to fight. The thing is, nobody was there. The windows were locked. The basement and the attic were clear. So was very other room in the house. The house was still locked. They both locked the bedroom door and waited for Ryan's mum to come home. When they did, they told her about everything, and they would all search around the house together. Nothing. Not even the dust was disturbed. Everything looked normal. The thing that confirms the paranormal aspect is that both the back door and front door had bells on them to signify if anyone was coming up to the door. It'd be physically impossible to hear the door without the bells making noise. When he told me this, my skin ran cold, and Ryan looked more and more depressed every day. But the thing that scares me the most is, if this is a paranormal story, who was the ghost that entered the house? The story starts many years ago when I was a little girl living in an apartment with my dad and my older brother. I used to hate going to bed early and often snuck out of bed just to run around the living room in the middle of the night. I always left the light off and I was able to see because there was enough light shining through the window from the balcony. On one such night I slipped out of bed and made sure my brother was still asleep, and we shared a bunk bed and walked as quietly as possible to the living room. I felt the bedroom door open every time, in case I needed to run back to bed. As I played around in the living room, jumping on the couches and the like, I noticed a black shadow from the balcony. I immediately stopped and looked outside, and just saw the silhouette, like black figure, just standing by the edge of the door, near the handle. I freaked out and immediately ran back to bed and closed the door. This woke up my brother and he got worried and asked what was wrong. I told him what I had seen and he said he'd go look for himself to make sure everything was alright. He opened the door and I watched him walk out. A few minutes later he came back in and he said he didn't see anything, so he must be okay now. I accepted the answer and went back to bed. Later I realised my brother had still left the door open. I crawled out of bed to close it myself, and before I could touch the door, it slammed shut loudly. This caught my brother's attention, and when I explained what happened, he was confused, and I was so terrified. I asked to sleep with him, and he let me. A minute later, my dad came into the room and asked what was the noise. I explained to him what I'd seen. He didn't really believe me, and as he doesn't believe in the paranormal, he figured one of us had slammed the door. My brother tried to say it was a draft, just to get him to go back to bed, but my dad didn't think so, since he left the windows open and the balcony locked and air off. So my dad goes about trying to question us to see who slammed the door, and in the middle of me trying to explain that I was really only trying to close the door but never touched it, and we hear a loud noise coming from the living room. It sounded like another door slamming shut. My dad automatically leaves the route towards the living room and turns on the light. My brother and I followed and saw our dad looking around. We only have two doors in the living room, the front door and the balcony door. My dad checks the front door first and finds it locked, and then he goes to the balcony door and finds it unlocked and slightly ajar. See, when the doors get slammed, it loses enough that it actually slides back a bit. My dad's closed and locked the door and sent my brother and I back to bed, and that was the end of that. A few more years later we lived in that apartment, and every now and then I see that black figure and hear a door slam, and every time the pillows on the couches were on the floor. My dad always thought of the logical answer, and my brother and I just started to ignore since he was. We moved out once my dad got remarried to my stepmom and lived in a two-story house. My brother and I figured, new house, new story. We ended up getting 2 cats and a dog for a little while. It was normal until my stepmom asked me one morning if I had folded the dog's blanket. I said no and told her I hadn't even touched it. She accepted my answer and went to ask my brother. He said no as well, and asked what this was about. She replied that she had found the blanket folded and on top of the washing machine. This was incredibly odd, as the dog slept in the bed on the floor and hated her blanket being taken away. We only ever touch it if we're going to wash it, and it had just recently been cleaned. Well, our stepmom was really quick to believe it was the work of a ghost. She explained to me that she had seen ghosts before when she was younger. My dad, however, reminded us that ghosts weren't real, and said one of us had probably folded it and forgot about it. We moved on with our day, and that was only the beginning. I started to see that black figure again, and it was always by an open door, right next to the handle. I started getting really scared because I had startled sleeping with my door open so the cats could get in whenever they wanted. I tried to ignore it and just sweep it off, but Whenever I heard the door creak, I was terrified to look and always waited until I felt my cat on the bed before I would look. One night I was staying up late to do homework and I heard the door creak, so I turned right away, not really thinking, and just wanted to see if my cat's for a break. Instead, I saw that black figure and my heart stopped. I was just frozen, and I couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. The door just slammed shut and I screamed. My stepmom and my dad came running up, and to see what was wrong, I told them what I seen. My dad just thought I was tired and seeing things, but my stepmom listened and told me to just wait and she'd be right back. When she came back, she said it was with a rosary and she hugged it with a door handle, telling me I'd just been seeing things, and if I saw it again, just go straight to her. It was after this incident when I started having things happen at my mother's house. Every day like clockwork, you'll start hearing this creaking sound from the ceiling about 6 PM and start hearing it at 3 AM. My mother and my husband brushed it off as the house settling or the pipes, but my brother and I both agreed that it was just too weird to be in a time frame. After that, I started getting up, woken by a Rottweiler growling at the wall by my bed. I didn't think of anything of it at first because he tended to bark at and growl out the windows a lot. But when I realised that he was actually growling at my wall, I got nervous. I slowly crawled out of bed and went to hug my dog. He paused and he sniffed and growled at me. And look over there. And once he was satisfied, he'd go back to growling at the wall. After a few minutes, he stopped and then sniffed me again before sitting down. I'd get back into bed and put his head on my pillow until I fell asleep. When my mother's second dog got old enough, she'd come into my room at night as well and start growling at the wall too. She was that kind of dog who made noises and kind of talked to you, but she never growled or barked. She did the same thing and got into bed and stopped growling, but it started affecting my sleep. I eventually told my stepmom what was going on after a picture frame above my head flew into the floor and crashed. She told me that there was a spirit or ghost that was following me, and that I needed to be careful since she believed it was only going to get more active. Hearing those words scarred me. I managed to push on and try to ignore the doors, but closely randomly and the dogs growling, even my cat started to act weird around the house sometimes. But I just kept thinking if I ignored it, it'd go away. But I was wrong about that. I explained my worries to my stepmom about the things following me here, and she told me to just let her know the moment if I saw it again. A few weeks after, everything was fine, until I started hearing noises, the kind that sound like someone is having a conversation, but it was muffled like they were a few rooms away. I'd stop whatever I was doing to go check it out, but whenever I did, it just stopped. It got to the point where I just completely left it alone in the house, and I heard what noises my dad talking to someone, and I called out for him, confused, only to look out the window and see that his car was gone. After that, I started hearing footsteps like someone was walking around in my parents' room upstairs. The weirdest thing about it though was it sounded exactly like my dad's footsteps. Everyone had specific ways of walking, and his were very more fuddled, and loud. I brought it up with my stepmom and she told me she heard it too. Then she explained to me that it was coming from a closet, and that sometimes she'd walk in to find the boxes from the top shelf in the middle of the floor. Keep this in mind that she is one of the those big walk-in closets, so anything that falls would naturally end up in the centre of the floor. I still live with my dad and stepmom to this day while going to college, and I still hear all this stuff. I don't see the figure as much anymore, as the doors don't slam as often, but they still do shut. It's just quieter. The thing that made my friends believe that something was following me, but was because I spent the night at their house, and anything usually experienced started happening whenever I came over. One friend of mine who is terrified of anything paranormal actually refused to sleep at my house and doesn't like me spending the nights with her at hers because she had seen the black figure. It's sort of because it became a bit of a joke now with them. They tease me and say that if you were to invite me over to your house, prepared to have 2 guests instead of 1, or you make sure your doors are shut before sleeping. Some friends are incredibly curious and often like to come over or invite me over just so that they can try and see the figure. I honestly don't know what to do about it, and don't know if I should do anything. I mean, it's never been hostile towards anything, but it's still unsettling to see sometimes that have it break some stuff nowadays. I sleep with the door closed and locked